Hi guys, so we're back again with how to write a race response. This is lesson number 2. We're going to focus on how to cite evidence in this section. So this is the second sentence that you will be writing after your restate and answer. So let's jump in. The very first thing that we need to do is we need to clear up exactly what the word cite means. So cite is the verb. Citation is the noun. So I might say to you, you need a citation in this. What I'm telling you to do is I want you to cite something. So first of all, what is cite? So to cite is to write or say the words of a book or an author. You can quote, that means to quote directly. You're taking the author's exact words right out of a book, right out of a text, right out of a song. You're citing it, you're taking it out. The other way to cite is just to mention something from the text. So it doesn't have to be that you take it directly, but you mention what happened. So that is the two meanings that cite can have. So here's an example. So when you are citing directly from a text, it would look like this. In the article, Green writes, notice the quotation marks because I'm quoting the author, "There was never a man so hurt as Joseph." Okay. Now here, where I just mention it, where I cite, but I don't quote, in the article, the man was crying and wailing so hard that the walls were shaking. So I'm not taking the words directly out of the book or text. I'm letting the reader know something that happened. So this is to cite, to take information out of a text and use it as evidence for what I'm writing. And there's two ways, quote and mention. Okay, so when you are asked a question, you need to look back into the text so that you can answer it. And one of the best ways to do that is to highlight. You guys are going to have some pieces of work that you are going to have to be working with. And I'm going to show you how to highlight within them in a couple weeks. We'll have a couple of different websites that we're going to use. But most of the time, when you're looking for evidence for something, the best way to make sure you know exactly where it is to highlight. So I have an example text here. So I'm just going to read through that very quickly with you. So in my example text, it says, "Competition cheerleading is a dangerous sport. When tumbling, many cheerleaders land incorrectly and sprain an ankle, tear a ligament, or even break a bone. Flyers can get hurt easily too. The base may have fingernails that pierce the flyer's skin. If the flyer gets dropped by the base, there may be bruises and other injuries. The base may get hurt from the flyer kicking or landing wrong. They may also get scratches from fingernails. Injuries happen all the time on the cheerleading mat." Okay, so when I look at my questions, I know I need to find evidence for these. Well, if I want to keep it in my head of where these are, the best thing to do is to look back for it and to highlight it. So how can cheerleaders get hurt while tumbling? So I am going to locate my highlight tool up here. Okay, so I'm going to highlight this section. Many cheerleaders land incorrectly and sprain an ankle, tear a ligament, or even break a bone. I want to keep that for how I want to talk about them. Then I go up here to this where it says highlight. And, I normally go with yellow since it's nice and bright. Okay. And down here, my second question says, how can a base get hurt during a stunt? So I need to look for the section where it talks about how they can get hurt. Here it talks about the base may have fingernails, but that's about the base hurting somebody. That's not about how they could get hurt. Here. Okay, so it says the base may get hurt from the flyer kicking or landing wrong. They may also get scratches from fingernails. Okay, so I selected that. Then I'm going up here to my highlight tool. Okay, so now here's an example of why some race responses could be short and some race responses can be long. This quote that I just highlighted, this piece right out of here, is 2 sentences long, whereas this one up here is only 1. So sometimes your race response is longer simply because your evidence is longer. Okay, so now what do I do with these? Well, when I go to answer it, there's a couple of different ways I can go about using the information that I just highlighted. So I have the stuff ready to go, but how do I put it into the race response? Okay, so let's practice both ways. So the question is this is the question we're going to focus on. How can a base get hurt during a stunt? Okay, so this is the information that we highlighted in the passage above. And I'm going to think about how will I write this in? So how do I write it in as a direct quote? Well, you just use exactly what the author said, right? But you have to introduce it. You can't just put it in. That's called a naked quote. When you just have like a piece of quoted text, you can't do that. You have to introduce it so the reader knows, hey, this is a part that I didn't write. So a really simple one to use is in the text, it states. Simple. You put a comma, then you put quotation marks, and you just grab the evidence that you need and put it in. In this case, I'm just going to copy paste. I don't even have to write it all down. And I put my quotation mark at the end. Done. Now, what about the other way? What if you want to just reference this, but you don't want to quote it directly? So the thing you can't do is you can't say exactly what the author said. That's plagiarism. It's stealing. So you do something called a paraphrase. A paraphrase is when you say what the author said, but you just put it in your own words. So I'm going to use the same kind of intro. I'm going to say in the text, just to start off my citation sentence. In the text, I'm going to say says, it says that, and here it says the base may get hurt from the flyer kicking or landing wrong and scratches from the fingernails. Okay, so it says that a base, let's change it up. Instead of saying hurt, I'm going to say injured. Could be injured from a kick instead of from the flyer kicking. I'm going to say that. Or from falling wrong. I'll say that instead of landing wrong. And then let's say they can also be injured from, instead of saying fingernails, there's really no other way to say that. We could say just nail scratches. So I tried my hardest to not take what the author had originally written, and I put the text in my own words. Notice I didn't use any quotation marks because I didn't quote it right out of the book, but this is still a citation. Both of these are citations. Both of them are correct. Both of them could be used in a race response. Okay. Moving on. So here's a couple of different ways that you can start a citation. So these are called sentence starters. I'm usually going to give you guys, well, in class, we would normally have a big giant poster that would have a whole bunch of these for you to use, but you can always come back to this PowerPoint to look for these as examples of ways that you could start off a citation. So the author states, the one that I used before, in the text it says, according to, and then you put in the author's last name, in the article or in the text or in the book or in the poem. A lot of different ways you could do that. Very simple. For example, would be another one, or for instance. So all of these are awesome ways to start a citation sentence for your race response. Okay, let's do a little bit of practice again. I find that people tend to get the restate part of race pretty quickly. Citation takes a little bit longer and a little bit more practice. So I like to show you exactly what it looks like. So here's another example. More than 100 years ago, in 1871, there was a big fire in Chicago. It had been all hot all summer, and the trees and bushes were dry because they needed rain. It had not rained enough to keep them growing green. The fire continued burning. In fact, it lasted more than 30 hours. People tried to stop it, but because most of the buildings were made of wood, the fire kept on burning. Finally, it started to rain, and that helped put the fire out. When the people saw how much was burned, they were extremely worried. They wondered how they would be able to stay here. They could have moved, but they decided to stay and rebuild the city of Chicago. Okay, so the question is, why did the city burn so easily? Okay, so here I already put in my restate and answer on both sides. So now I need to add my second sentence. I need to add my citation. So I'm going to go back up here and I'm going to highlight the area that tells me why it burned so easily. So I remember it said it had been hot all summer and that it was dry. So I'm going to highlight that section. And then also it said that most of the buildings were made of wood. That would also not be helpful. Okay, so here's an example of if you were going to do a quote, it might be a little bit challenging because you have two separate kind of far away sentences from each other that you want to reference. And I'll show you how to do that. But I would say in this case, this is one that I would maybe want to write about in my own words because the citation sentence would be a little easier. So let's look back. Let's say, how do we want to start this? You know what? I'll just use it for example. The city burned easily because it was dry. Starting my citation sentence, for example, it had not rained and was hot. Also, the buildings back then were made of materials that burned easily, like wood. Okay, so that is a citation sentence where I didn't have to use a quote. Easy peasy. Over here, now let's say I wanted to use a quote. It's a little bit harder. Okay, so I'm just going to use my same beginning. Again, I'm going to say, for example. And, jump down. For example, and let's say it had been hot all summer and the trees and bushes were dry. Okay, so I'm going to grab that. I'm going to unhighlight it. Copy. Oh, it might be too big to go in this area. Let's see. Yeah, it's okay. Okay. Now I want to put my quotation marks around that so somebody would know that that was a quote, that it's not from me writing. I'm going to make this all the same size so it doesn't bother me. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to kind of connect the quotes. So I'm just going to say, and also, and now I'm going to put the next quote. I'm going to put most of the buildings were made of wood. Let's say buildings. Okay, so that's an example of how you can kind of connect two sentences together. So I just used a conjunction. I just used and now I'm able to connect pieces from all over to help use as evidence. Okay. So I have one more practice here. What I'm going to ask is that you do this if you need some help. I'm going to put this up into the Google assignment. And if you want to like check on how you're doing before you jump into the Edulastic, you can do this and turn it into me, and you can double check with me to see if you're doing okay. But this part it's not necessary, it's not required. It's just if you want to check in and make sure that you got it before you do the actual assignment. So right now, what you're going to do, if you feel comfortable, if you feel ready, you're going to go ahead and get on the Edulastic assignment called Citing Evidence Practice, and go ahead and do that. Let me know if you need any help with anything.